Our last session for day one will focus on professional airmanship, and covering this topic will be Ken Williams, Flight Safety International's program manager based in Hong Kong. Ken, the floor is yours.
Ken, you need to be unmuted. We'll just send you a request here. Make sure you're unmuted there.
Yep. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. You're good to go.
Okay. Hi, welcome from Hong Kong. I'd like to talk a little bit this afternoon about airmanship, something that's fairly close to my heart. I've been in aviation for 51 years, and I've seen many variations of good and bad airmanship. So what I would like to start with is, what is airmanship? It's very difficult to define what airmanship is. And if I ask a group of pilots to tell me and say, write down three words that typifies airmanship to them, if we compare those lists, you'll have very seldom where one or two will agree with each other. Everybody has a different opinion about what airmanship is. So if we go back in time, prior to the Second World War, well after the Second World War, the military spent a long time during training teaching airmanship. And it was a major subject during military training. Late 70s, there was a spate of civilian accidents. And just to bring your mind back, end of 77, there was United DC-8 that crashed. They had electrical problems and they weren't getting gear indications. They went into a holding pattern. And while they were running the checklists, the holding pattern extended into high ground. The ATC was a little bit late in warning them and they impacted the high ground. December 78, another United flight. This one was, as they extended the gear, there was a thump and then there was vibration for the rest of the flight. So they were worried that the gear was not locked down and they spent so long running the checklist that they ran out of fuel and they crashed. So United was one of the first commercial operators that took time to create a course which started in the early 80s, where they started to teach CRM, because the accident reports were fairly damning that CRM was sadly lacking in the accidents. There have been many more. You remember the Tenerife accident with the KLM and Pan Am 747s. Again, airmanship. 72, the Eastern Airlines TriStar. Again, just a simple nose gear light that wasn't working. They missed the fact that the autopilot came off and a completely serviceable aircraft crashed into the Everglades, killing all the passengers. So there have been many, many examples of airmanship contributing to accidents. And late 70s, even the military, because by that stage when the airlines started to push for CRM, and professors and psychologists and everybody got on board developing CRM exercises and training programs, airmanship started to take a bit of a back seat, and CRM was pushed to the front. And once again, if I ask a lot of people, what is airmanship? A common answer that I get is good CRM. Now, CRM is probably part of it, but it's not the whole picture. What else goes into airmanship? Some people say, well, it's just common sense. Unfortunately, again, another wise man said, common sense is not very common nowadays. So it's something that if we want to promote airmanship, we're going to have to train it. Again, if you took the time just to put some thoughts down, if any of these items come up on your list, again, you're quite correct. It's professionalism, it's awareness, it's consideration, it's experience, it's cooperation, knowledge of your aircraft, knowledge of your situation, or discretion. But there's many other items as well. So none of those points are incorrect, but they're not the full picture of what CRM is. Once again, you speak to most pilots, they will tell you that, oh, I saw, pilot exhibiting good airmanship or bad airmanship. But if you ask them to define exactly what they base that saying on, it's very difficult to define. So let's try just to unravel it a little bit. In the time we have today, unfortunately, we won't be able to go into the deep. I'll look at some of the main points that are to me are important. But as I said, airmanship, since we started to fly, you talk about the Wright brothers, they exhibited good airmanship because they knew their aircraft, they checked the weather, but they were the only aircraft flying, so they didn't have the problems of mid-airs or the congestion that we have in the air nowadays. So although everybody says it's important, there's a lot of discrepancies on how we can teach it. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of documents, there are books on airmanship, but not a single document uses the same definition of airmanship. So that creates our problem. We need to look at, is it a process? Is it something that we do? Is it a state that we get into? Is it a skill that we can teach? Or is it an outcome of what we've done? Does it mean having good flying skills? Yes, that's part of it, absolutely. Good judgment, good situational awareness, or just a good attitude? So if we want to train airmanship, we need to try and define it a little bit more accurately than what books do at the moment. If we want to create a training program to teach airmanship, we're going to need to identify the knowledge that we need, the skills, the attitude, and we need to find ways to train it. I said we've lost that ability because, as I say, even the military, in the 70s when CRM became big, the military book on airmanship actually disappeared from the RAF. It became part of human factors, which became part of aviation medicine, which is a vast subject, and airmanship got relegated to a chapter of aviation medicine and human performance. Now, again, there's been many, many cases of books that have been written about the human factors in accidents, and we can't deny that most of our accidents have a very high percentage of human factor. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is, I said, I can't cover everything, but if I can just raise some awareness of the complexities of airmanship, then I think this afternoon would have been well spent. As I said, I often get the answer, good CRM. So just have a look at the common table. You're going to have a lesson tomorrow or a chat on CRM tomorrow. But those are the 4 components of the accepted CRM checks that we do on check rides, etc. So we look at cooperation, which obviously is a good part of airmanship, leadership and managing the flight. And on our modern aircraft, that really becomes an important one. We'll look at that a little bit later. I'm not going to cover all the sub-points, just read them on your own. Situational awareness, a huge part of airmanship, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue. And decision-making, a very difficult aspect, again, of airmanship, because sometimes even not making a decision is a good decision, but you must have a reason why you didn't make this decision or what your decision was based on. And for decision making, that and fits in with situational awareness, because the situational awareness creates your mental model of what you're looking at or what you're trying to base your decision making is on. A subpart of CRM that's become well punted in the last couple of years is threat and error management. Again, I do like that because it is a very important part, and it wasn't highlighted to the importance that it is today. And I do believe that it's, in the last couple of years, it's made a big difference to the decision-making on flight decks, threat and error management discussions. It was first mooted by the University of Texas Aviation Department in '94. So it's come quite a long way in those couple of years. So as I said, situational awareness is probably one of the biggest keystones of airmanship. So what is situational awareness? Once again, there are many, many definitions of situational awareness. One component that we can look at, which is the common one, which everybody refers to mostly when they talk about situational awareness, is positional situational awareness. Where are you in the 3-4-dimensional world of flight? Okay, in air, height, speed, and even time. One section that we don't define that often is tactical situational awareness. And there are sub-parts of situational awareness that we also don't always cover. So let's have a look at them in a little bit more detail. So for positional situational awareness, we've covered the 3 items, so height, attitude, and speed, where you are geographically, particularly high ground in vicinity. Airways, controlled airspace, that's again become a bugbear in congested airspace around airports, where the airways and the controlled airspace are getting bigger and very, very busy. Met features obviously affect your situational awareness, and then other aircraft. Tactical situational awareness, although it's very close to positional situational awareness, it's definitely a separate part. If we just look at one or two examples, we're flying along and we're on a heading that maybe ATC have given us, and you realize that you're going to get to an airway. If you're going to penetrate that airway, it's obviously going to spoil your day, because if you haven't got authorization to enter, at best you're going to get told to give your phone number to ATC. At worst, there's a good chance of collision if you enter blindly into an airway. So we need to use the positional situational awareness to base our tactics of what we're going to do to stay safe.
Ken, sorry to interrupt. Just want to make sure that you have your slides to screen share.
Yeah, you don't have it?
Yeah. No worries, take your time.
Oh, they haven't been coming up. My apologies.
No worries, no worries.
Is that better?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my apologies. Let me go.
No worries at all. Perhaps you can backtrack this a little bit and let the audience see a little bit of your slides there.
I'll go back to that one where we had situational awareness. The rest was just background, really. So we spoke about those items as far as positional situational awareness. The tactical situational awareness, we've spoken about that one. The second one is something, again, that's becoming a problem in some countries like China, in Russia, and even in France, where very often the local controllers will speak to the aircraft in their mother tongue. And if you don't know what they're talking about, you are deprived of some of the inputs that you have to create a model of what is going on around you. So this example here is, you hear a background transmission from another aircraft that's maybe an hour ahead of you, and they're talking about the weather along the route or at your arrival, your destination airport. Your tactical situational awareness goes about is, you might even start to plan a diversion earlier than waiting to get overhead and pick up the weather. So the information coming in is definitely important as part of this developing a mental model of what you're looking at. And obviously any emergencies, abnormal situations are also categorized in the tactical situational awareness, because it's a malfunction that could affect the flight forward if it's not affecting it immediately, and you're going to have to make decisions about part of your flight somewhere in the, sometime in the future. We speak about building the mental model. That perhaps brings in some of the other parts of situational awareness that a lot of people don't always speak about, although they do take it into consideration, is knowing yourself and the members of your crew. You might have one of the crew members, they're not feeling the sharpest today. That could affect your flight after a 14-hour flight. You're doing approach in bad weather. He's not feeling it the best. You have to step up and take up the slack. So part of this situational awareness is more than just the basics that we talk about to build a proper mental model. Workload. When the workload gets high, our capabilities decrease, particularly when tired. We start to make mistakes. The stress goes up. we try with Airmanship, part of the CRM part of it is share. The more you can share, the other person is brought into the loop, the better your situational awareness, the better your airmanship is going to be at the end. Just again, you've probably seen these next couple of pictures that I'm going to show you. Building this mental model is sometimes affected by what we see, because what we see is not always what we need to know. The human mind is so complex that it very often confuses us. I'm sure you've seen this one previously. Those two parallel lines are exactly the same length, but because of the end bits added to them, it creates a perception that the bottom one is longer than the top one. And there are situations in aviation where you're looking at a ground feature that can affect your perception or your mental model. Looking at an aircraft, depending on the aspect and the light, it can affect your judgment of how far this aircraft is away from you. Another one is this one. Again, all the diagonal lines, the long diagonal lines are parallel, but because of the hatched lines, it creates the perception that they are converging on each other. And in real life, once again, we have inputs that can confuse us and give us the wrong mental model that we're going to be basing our decisions on. And the last one is this one, where both yellow blocks are exactly the same size, but because it's superimposed on a object that's moving into the distance and changing its aspect ratio, it gives you the impression that the further block is bigger than the closer one. And that again could be dangerous in certain aspects. Night landings, this dark hole effect as we fly into. So your perception of what you're seeing might not be the correct model to base your decision making on. Also with situational awareness is obviously managing our aircraft systems, the status of aircraft fuel state, and the one I've highlighted is talking a little bit about automation, because automation has become quite a big problem in the last few years. If you look at a pilot as a human being, it's actually quite easy to teach a pilot how to fly an aircraft very well, to manage its systems very well. We do that in our recurrent training, and to make the decisions based on the inputs that they receive, that you receive, what you're actually going to do. If we look at a computer on the other side, a computer can monitor literally millions of different parameters in a second, and it will display a result, whatever the computer is being programmed to show you. Our problem today is we've got computers flying the aircraft and human beings monitoring. And a human being's capability of monitoring is very limited. Again, the psychologists have proved you can only concentrate at a very high level for a couple of minutes. So once again, think of a long flight at night, coming into a difficult airport, weather bad, and aircraft is an automation, but is it doing exactly what you wanted to do? I'm sure you've all heard it before. I hear it in the sim many, many times. Why is it doing that? It's been the final words on many, many accident voice recorders. Why is it doing that before they've crashed? So automation has become a problem for us as pilots because how do we monitor that it's doing what it should be doing? And once again, how do we build that into the mental model that we are going to be basing our decision making on? When autopilots came in eons ago, they were fairly simple. They maintained heading and height, and you either put it on or you put it off, and the rest of the time you were hand flying the aircraft. But with modern autopilots, the difference of different modes that you can select have become so great that it actually becomes a problem in deciding which mode to use, and even if it's connected, is it doing what you want it to do? So the basic decision is either flying it manually or flying it on autopilot, but there are a number of permutations of that. So the two extremes of those is if you're flying it manually completely, you can do it absolutely with no flight director, no autothrust, no map, you just flying the aircraft on visual cues. Or if you go to the full hog with the autopilot, then the flight director is commanding, autothrottles are engaged, and it's following LNAV, VNAV commands. In between those two ones, there's all these combinations of what we can do. And as said, having these combinations can actually generate a high workload. And we'll talk about the anomaly of automation in a moment. So once the autopilot is engaged, remembering which mode is doing what and what it should be doing can be a challenge. And again, one of the things we really stress in training is to call the FMA modes, because that keeps the other pilot in the loop. Just to acknowledge that the autopilot is on, but not that it's changed modes, has often caused or led to dangerous situations and even accidents. So if we can't ensure that we know which mode is controlling the aircraft and what it should be doing during that mode, then obviously our monitoring is going to be flawed. It'll affect our mental model once again. Questions around when we should use automation. Once again, company SOPs, very good way of dictating to try and keep a standard to the company, and also to do that during training so that they do or train as they fly. If we just go back into the history of automation, obviously scientists, engineers, and academics, they look at automation in a different way to pilots, because they look at how much the automation is augmenting the flight, how's it supporting, and what information you are getting from it. So as far as the scientists and the engineers go, they talk about 7 to 10 levels of automation. Whereas if you speak to the average pilot, 3 is about the normal number that they will talk about. So the 3 that we talk about commonly is obviously manual flight with no automation, tactical autopilot, where you're going to have the autopilot engaged, but you're controlling heading and your either flight level change or vertical speed to do what you want to achieve. And then third one is strategic automation, where everything is engaged and you're just sitting and watching. So that's the easiest way that pilots will distinguish between the modes of automation. But again, a couple of pilots will say, no, there is 1 or 2 others, because with manual flying, you can have it completely raw data, or you can still have the flight director and have the auto throttles engaged. But again, those are semantics. there are definitely differences in opinion. This guy on automation, Bainbridge, said that one of these ironies of automation is in the cruise, the workload was normally fairly low, and with the modern automation, it's got even lower. We really just sit and we watch what the FMS is doing, fill in the log every now and again to see that the fuel burn is correct and so on, but we're just monitoring, and our monitoring over a long cruise period decreases. And unfortunately, the last part of the paragraph on the screen is it increases the workload in phases where it was already high. So if we're doing an instrument approach, now we have to check that the automation changes from blue needles to green needles at the correct time. Has it captured the glide slope? So it's actually increased the workload in areas where the workload was already fairly high. The last little bit I'd just like to talk about this afternoon is discipline. Very often discipline doesn't even come onto anybody's list when I've asked them to give me 3 or 4 words that they think sums up airmanship. And discipline is probably the most important, because if we have all the other items that we've touched on today, if you don't have self-discipline to stick to your decisions, to stick to SOPs, to do good CRM, then your airmanship is going to be regarded as being bad. So discipline in aviation, it's from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, not just on certain phases of your flight. We look at some hazard attitudes that occur, again, because we're human beings. We're well trained and we sometimes have egos. We want to prove that we're the best, and sometimes that can lead to bad airmanship. So those hazardous attitudes at the bottom there, anti-authority, yeah, I hate being told what to do. You very often find where company SOPs are written to try and have a standard where you have different aircraft on in the company, on the different fleets, and they've tried to standardize procedures. Guys said, but it doesn't work on my aircraft, and they'll ignore SOPs. Impulsiveness, okay, doing something in the spur of the moment. It can't happen to me. The macho part, again, it is a problem. Resignation, I can't do anything about it. And complacency, really don't care about it. So what can we do to ensure that we don't fall into that trap? Follow SOPs, okay? Don't break rules, and don't accept anybody else breaking the rules. We've hopefully got to the point where even junior co-pilots will speak up when a captain is doing something incorrectly. But we still see, again, in different cultures where co-pilots keep quiet because they feel constrained by the gradient in the cockpit. Impulsiveness, I said, be prepared for every flight. Don't rush into decisions. Once again, we see it in the sim when you give malfunctions, engine fire. Sometimes they rush into it and follow the wrong procedures. We're human beings. The pilot that tells me he's never made a mistake doesn't exist. We've all made mistakes. Hopefully we learn from them and don't repeat them. The macho part, I said, work as part of the team. There have been how many accidents, particularly in air shows, where the pilot flying tried to just demonstrate a little bit more than the capability of the aircraft. And we've had wings come off, we've had impact with the ground. So if you're a professional pilot, you know how good you are. You don't have to prove it to anybody. Remember that. Resignation, you can always contribute. Don't feel shy to speak up. It might be one point that the pilot flying or the captain at that stage didn't take into consideration. He's got other decisions to make at the moment, and it's very often easy to miss one point. He might not have the same mental model that you do. So always contribute. I've always told people in the class, there's no such thing as a dumb question. There's dumb answers, but there's no such thing as dumb question, because if you don't know, ask the question. It's not dumb. And lastly, complacency. Be ready. We know abnormal situations, emergencies happen suddenly, and very often during the stage when you're most relaxed. So always be ready, take control. I said, that term I spoke about a little bit earlier on automation, why is it doing that? Which is, as I said, it's been the last words on a voice recorder for a number of accidents. If I'm in a sim and the aircraft does something weird, I don't want to hear pilots saying, why is it doing that? Do something. Take control. If it's not doing what you wanted to do, don't ask the question, fix it. I've seen people go the wrong way into holes, descending on a glide slope before they established on the localizer. Modern automation keeps us out of trouble a lot of times, but it can bite you. And our job with good airmanship is don't get to the point where something will bite you. Thanks very much. Just as a summary, if I can consider what we've spoken about, then probably in my terms, good definition, it's consistent good use of good judgment, consistent discipline, and then well-developed skills. You have to be able to fly the aircraft. And once again, we're starting to lose the handling skills because of automation. If we can achieve all those on every flight, then we should have a safe flight every time. Tony Kern wrote a book called Redefining Airmanship. If you've ever read it, it's available on Amazon. A little bit dated now with modern systems, but again, some very good points on that. And they talk about, again, the highest state of situational awareness completes the airmanship picture. My references for today, I took a lot of it out of the Royal Air Force AP 3456, which, as I said, used to be one of the manuals of airmanship. Volume 6 is now Aviation Medicine, which covers human factors, CRM, and airmanship. The CAE document, CAP 737, which goes on CRM. And then one or two points out of Tony Kern's books. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you took a couple of points away from it. And if you've got any questions, you're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Ken, from Flight Safety, for a very informative session. We'll give it just a minute or two for questions. Okay, with no further questions, thank you once again, Ken, for your experience and your expertise.
Thanks very much for the experience and for inviting me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the last session of day one. We would like to take a moment here to recognize our main sponsor, Bombardier Aviation. Bombardier Aviation is a longtime supporter of aviation safety in the region, including with AsBAA's prior safety days in Singapore. AsBAA greatly appreciates their support. Before we conclude, we at AsBAA would like to thank you for staying with us as we draw important lessons, some from mishaps and some, unfortunately, from tragedy, to help prevent the same unfortunate occurrences from happening again. Accidents and incidents occur from a chain of events. Every little bit of awareness and preparation will help us break that chain. It's our hope that this day was educational for everyone. Finally, we have an equally exciting agenda for tomorrow. We'll start with CRM and crew training with Catherine Ng and Logan in the morning from Hong Kong. And by midday, we'll have a session from Washington, D.C. with a former senior NTSB and FAA field investigator. By late afternoon, we'll conclude with a panel with 2 ICAO investigators, veterans on the field. We hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Stay safe and stay healthy.